We're going to go through the first 25 slides of this so I can keep pace with all my other sections of 242. And then since you guys have already had an exam, you're probably, for the most part, useless to me anyways, I'm going to kick you the hell out of here.
Yeah.
All right? We're done in about 45 minutes at most, maybe 15 minutes. So, here's the first part of this. Like we did for the respiratory system, we divide this into two sections. Remember how we did the conducting system and the respiratory part? Well, now we're doing the digestive organs, the ones that actually play a role in digesting your food, and then the support crew in a sense, the accessory organs that facilitate but don't actually do the digesting themselves with this. So to get a better idea of how this is all going to work, let's first remind ourselves of how we're going to protect all these organs. It's a repeating thing. You've already done the pericardium, you've already done the pleura. Now we're going to be doing the peritoneum. It's another serous membrane, right? Simple squamous. You have the visceral and the parietal. Nothing new here. We're just using this to represent abdominal organs. Well, there is one little twist though. When you combine these guys, right, I get to create a supporting tissue called mesenteries that are coming about because of these two layers of serous membrane. And these mesenteries are going to be involved in a structural scaffolding or holding the organs in place. Have any of you ever had a chance to work in a vet operating room as a vet tech? Anybody seen any veterinary surgical procedures? Like when your dog is dumb enough to swallow a bunch of socks, right? And you got to go in and open up the intestines or remove the sock and sew the intestine back up again. When you watch how carefully they put the intestines back in place, right? They simply just close their eyes and just poke them in. They're not careful at all. They just stuff them in there. Because the mesenteries are going to keep everything aligned in the proper order of events. So I don't have to take my time and make sure I get this part in first before this part. I just shove them in. Then if you're really cool, kind of shake them a little bit, right? Get them back in order if you really want to. And this is why it works. These mesenteries are going to hold the organs in place. So we have 4 mesenteries to focus on. I have this one up here, and how do I know the blue dots are for mesenteries? Because you got a blue word and a blue dot, right, to kind of keep your focus here, okay? You'd be surprised, right? So let's do the ones for the stomach first. We have an omentum. We have a lesser omentum, and we have a greater omentum. And the term lesser and greater refers to the anatomical structure of the stomach, which we'll see starting next week. But this lesser omentum helps to keep your stomach in place by attaching to the back wall. And the next slide will let you actually see how that's taking place. So my omentums are for the stomach. Then I have what's called the mesocolon, and we're only going to work on the word mesocolon, not the various parts of it. And so the mesocolon for us is going to be the mesenteries that help keep the large intestine in place. Don't worry about ascending, transverse, and descending segments. We're just going to do mesocolon for the large intestine. Then we're going to have the mesenteries that keep the small intestine in place. So we're going to call that the mesentery proper. And that'll keep your small intestines all aligned. And the thing about these mesenteries is, if you ever watch those either war movies and the guy gets hit by a hand grenade and his guts come pouring out of his abdomen, or you watch samurai swords, right? They slice you open and your guts come pouring out, ain't gonna happen. These keep your guts in place. So I could literally, we'll take Taz. We're going to fillet her from pubic to xiphoid. I'm going to hang you up on the ceiling and shake you back and forth, right? Your guts will not come pouring out because they're held in place by these guys, by mesenteries. Because if you look at a side view, all of your organs are attached to the back of the abdominal wall. So they can't come pouring out, which is kind of sad, you know?
Now it's going to ruin movies for me.
I know it's going to ruin the movie, exactly. But I get to see now the side view. Here's the anterior view, right? Let's look at the lesser omentum and the greater omentum. There's the lesser, right? And then there's your greater. And here's the thing you want to focus on. This is your greater omentum. It's known as an apron, because it literally will come down to about the level of the belly button, if not a bit lower. And when you do an autopsy or work on a cadaver, you have to literally roll it out of the way because it's actually covering all of your intestines. When we bring kitties back out next week, because you guys are going to have to spend way more time on kitties than you ever have, the greater omentum is this like layer of connective tissue full of fat, and you literally just roll it up and get it out of the way. And it forms an apron. We'll come back to these in a second. Here's an actual cartoon of it, right? And there's the greater omentum. That's the lesser omentum. And if you want to look at the small intestines, you literally have to just kind of take it and just fold it out of the way. That's why it's called an apron. It forms a sheet of mesentery tissue. Well, there's my mesentery proper, right, hanging onto all my small intestines. But then we have to look at the red stars. Those are retroperitoneal organs. Just like your kidneys were retroperitoneal. I've got several abdominal organs that are behind the parietal peritoneum.
John, with the lesser omentum, is that just that area right there?
Yep.
That's it.
That's
it
it.
doesn't go around or anything. It's just that one.
Nope.
Okay.
Because now that right there is actually then visceral peritoneum.
Okay.
So when you join the visceral with the parietal, then you form those mesenteries. So think about the pancreas. All right, I want to keep it in place. The duodenum, I want to keep it in place. The rectum, I want to keep it in place. The uterus is actually a little bit of a retroperitoneal, but since it's not a digestive organ, I didn't put a red star next to it, but I'll remind you of that when we get into that latter part of our unit. And then of course then the urinary bladder, which is a part of digestion in a sense. But they're actually all tucked behind the parietal peritoneum, and the way you can know that is you come over here and find the word, oh, there it is, and you just simply trace that white line. That entire white line is the parietal peritoneum, and all these organs are behind it. It would be as if we hired Scott back here to be our interior decorator, and he's not the smartest interior decorator. We had all these cool photographs on the walls, and he came in and wallpapered our walls without removing the photographs, right? The photographs are now behind the wallpaper. So the photographs are retro wallpaper, right? Here's the wallpaper, and the organs are behind it. So I can keep them in place. That's why they are retro, right? Peritoneum.
Why do they not have the uterus as retroperitoneal, John? It kind of looks like those.
It is. I just said it's not part of the digestive system.
Oh.
Okay, here's a photograph of kitties that you'll be looking at in person live next week. I can see my small intestines, and there's the mesentery proper tissue, right? There's my large intestine, there's my mesocolon, and it's kind of hard to realize that that actually is the greater omentum. It's just been folded back up and kind of gotten out of the way. But you guys will be looking at all this up close and personal next week, so it'll require gloves. All right, let's talk about the generality of our digestive tract. From mouth to anus, it is a big tube. We just changed the shape of the bag, right? The stomach is just a ballooned out portion of your esophagus, the intestines and the anus and such. So with your entire digestive tract, we have 4 major layers, right? The mucosa, the submucosa, the muscularis externa, and the serosa. Why is that called submucosa? What does sub refer to? Because it's below the mucosa, right? Right? So let's take a look at maybe this little thing right there, that little finger-like projection, and zoom in on it, and we get this. This is one little finger-like projection that we'll learn more about next week. But it does show me, again, my 4 layers of mucosa, submucosa, muscularis externa, but now way more detail, a little more magnification. And then I realized I can take the mucosa way up here and divide it into different layers, different regions. So the uppermost layer is the mucosal epithelium, because I know the definition of epithelium. Of course, you all remember the definition of epithelium, right? Tissue that covers the outside or lines the inside, right? This is the actual lining of your gut. That is what the food is up against, right? And it's that little pink line you can see right there. That's the pink line, and that pink line is going to be then our mucosal epithelium, whatever it happens to be. Then I need to connect epithelium to muscle tissue. So how do I connect epithelium to muscle tissue? I use connective tissue, because it's going to connect one layer of tissue to another. And the name of the connective tissue is lamina propria. It's not the type of connective, it's just the name of it. It's actually areolar tissue. And you remember, what kind of connective tissue is areolar? Is that cartilage? It's loose connective tissue proper, right? There you go. All right, so I have my epithelium, then I have my connective tissue, and the last but not least layer of it is this stuff right here, whatever the hell those things are. You just kind of trace it, looking for a name. Oh, there's the name. Oh, wow, how about muscles of the mucosa layer? Muscularis mucosa. Now, take a look at it for a second, right? You see two layers of that muscularis mucosa, right? Let's come down here. We're going to skip this for a second. The muscularis externa has two layers. It's the same idea, just a lot bigger. That means the top layer, right, that one and this one, is actually known as the circular layer. And the layer right below it is actually known as the longitudinal layer. Same idea, circular, longitudinal, just that this is really thin, and that's really, really thick. They're both smooth muscle layers. Now we can get to the submucosa, because that's the layer below the mucosa. And I see red, blue, and green. I got arteries, I got veins, I have lymphatic vessels. But most importantly, I have a segment of nervous tissue, which is yellow here. And I know it's nervous tissue because I recognize the word plexus. All right, remember your sacral plexes and your lumbar plexes and your brachial plexes. Remember, plexes were woven nerves. So I know it's a nerve, and its nerves located in the submucosa, so why not call it the submucosal plexus? Kind of makes sense. So you realize a lot of these names are going to tell exactly where they are and what they are. Don't work overly hard at this. And that's all we're going to have for the moment, right? I've got some glands, and why don't we call them submucosal glands? Because they're glands in the submucosa. What they do, we'll get to that. This is just an overall general theme, whether it's my mouth, my esophagus, my stomach, my intestines, right? These are all the basic patterns. Then we get down to the muscularis externa, and as we said, a really big, thick circular layer, and a really big, thick longitudinal layer. And that's one difference between the muscularis mucosa and this. That's really thin. This is really thick. However, there is a difference. I look right here. I look in between them, and I don't see anything between the two layers. I come down here and go up, there's more yellow stuff. It's another plexus. It's another segment of nervous tissue. And it's between the circular and longitudinal. So this nervous tissue will make these muscles contract. They're going to control it. And we have another slide to kind of focus more on that. That's one name that doesn't really help you. All right, submucosal plexus helps me, I know where it is, but the myenteric is simply between the circular and longitudinal layers. Then I have the outermost layer known as the serosa. All right, let's go back and look at the mucosa a bit more. I know it has epithelium, but the type is going to vary from place to place. It'll vary from anything that is stratified to a layer that is simple. And as we go from part to part, we'll specify what it actually is. This is still the general theme, right? See, in general. This is not specific. I'll even have some mucosal glands in the mucosa. And they're going to provide lubrication usually. So the stuff moves easier along our tract. So some kind of mucus will come from the mucosal glands. What else do I find in the mucosal layer? Recognize anything about the words in blue? That right there. What are endocrine cells? What do they make? They make hormones. So you have hormone-producing cells in the mucosa. And we'll address why they're called enteroendocrine next week. But I know they're hormone because I recognize the word endocrine. I know they're in the mucosa because this whole page is about the mucosa. Finally, we're going to have some foldings in the mucosa. And if we have foldings that are called plicae, they don't disappear. They're permanent. These foldings will not go away. They will always be in the gut. All right, off to the lamina propria, which we know is connective tissue. That'll help hold my blood vessels and nerves in place. I'll even find some more mucus glands, especially in the mouth, the pharynx, the esophagus, and the duodenum. But you guys know you had glands in your esophagus to create more mucus. This will help you swallow stuff. Then that fun little muscularis mucosa, right? That little thin layer of muscle tissue. The bottommost layer of the mucosa, just to remind you that it is smooth muscle tissue. There's an inner layer, and that's the part you got to keep in mind. Inner means closest to the lumen, closest to where the food's going to be. And outer will be the furthest away from the lumen of that layer. The inner is always going to be circular, and the outer is always going to be longitudinal. All right, off to the submucosa, just a little more detail. I know it contains blood vessels and lymphatic vessels because that's what I see, right? Red and blue arteries and veins. The green is lymphatic, got that, and there's my little fun submucosal plexus. But I don't want you guys to get bored. Well, not me personally, but I guess anatomists. So they have another name for the submucosal plexus. It's the plexus of Meissner. Same thing, just a different name. And it's comprised of both parasympathetic and sympathetic neurons. And we're going to refocus on that next week, but what's a nickname for your parasympathetic nervous system?
Rest and digest.
Rest and digest, right? And then the sympathetic would be
Fight or flight.
fight or flight. So this is going to play a role in either increasing or decreasing muscle activity and gland activity. Then I also realize I have exocrine glands in the submucosa. And you think about, well, wait a minute. I've got exocrines in the submucosa, and I have endocrines in the mucosa. The exocrines are going to produce enzymes and buffers, depending upon where we are in the digestive tract. We are still doing a general theme, nothing specific just yet. All right, now let's get to the muscularis externa. It is a very thick region of smooth muscle, so we recognize that by looking at this little diagram. And there's my extra thick layer of muscle tissue found right in there. What is the purpose of this serosa? Well, it's to move what's called a bolus. So when you take a bite of a cheeseburger, it's a bite of a cheeseburger. As soon as you swallow it, I don't call it a bite of cheeseburger anymore. I call that mass of food a bolus. We're going to watch that ball of food going down our esophagus, and I need to move that mouthful of food. And we have two ways of moving it. One is called peristalsis. And let's go to the next slide and we'll come back to this. Peristalsis, go 2 slides forward, is the movement of the bolus, of the mass of food, from point A to point B. Just moving it along the length of your digestive tract. And that's what a peristalsis is. Just the movement of stuff from point A to point B to point C to point D. And the muscles I now know that I'm going to be using this with are going to be my muscularis externa, that really thick region of smooth muscle tissue. And that's the one that's comprised of the circular and longitudinal. I make those muscles work, I can move the food along the length of my tube. We'll talk more about how we actually do it, but just to give you a little bit of a start tonight, I've got circular muscles that help to pinch off my tube. So if I contract the circular muscles behind the bolus, and I relax the smooth muscles of the circular ahead of it, I can then contract the longitudinals and push that bolus to the next location. Then contract again what would now be the muscle mass behind it, contract the circulars behind it, relax the circulars ahead of it, and contract the longitudinal. I get to keep moving the food from point A to point B. So to remind you of how this works, right, you have the circular layer, right, which is this layer, and then in between it is a layer of nerve endings known as the myenteric plexus. That's why I put it in between these two terms. So you can remind yourself that this nerve plexus is between the circular and longitudinal, and like the Meissners, it's also comprised of parasympathetic and sympathetic. And we'll talk about what makes these things more active and less active next week. But I know that peristalsis is the movement from point A to point B to point C to point D, right? So you can try this tonight. When you eat something and swallow it, right, you can feel it going down your esophagus. The best way to feel how short your esophagus is and where your stomach actually is, wait until maybe you're really, really hungry or fairly hungry, and then have a glass of cold water or a cold drink, like iced tea perhaps. And take 2 mouthfuls and swallow. You can feel it going down you can feel it coating your stomach. Really, your stomach is right up here. You can actually feel it coating it. And you can kind of feel the contraction of the material going down. Now, that's swallowing, right? You're going to use peristalsis to swallow. You're going to use peristalsis to move it through your intestines. You're going to use peristalsis to poop. What's it called when stuff goes the other direction? Puking, vomiting, barfing, upchucking, porcelain god? Nah, it's all boring.
Regurgitate?
Yeah, it's a cow. How about this? Reverse peristalsis.
Wow.
That's what it's called. Reverse peristalsis is vomiting, puking, throwing up, upchucking. And we'll talk about the contents of that fun little stuff next week. All right, so what is segmentation? Well, think about the word. If you segment something, what are you doing? You're making it into smaller little chunks. So segmentation is when my intestinal tract kind of mixes the food back and forth, and instead of just pinching maybe this circular muscle and then maybe this one to move it along, I create segments of my intestines by contracting multiple parts of circular tissue to pinch off the bolus from a big piece to small little segments. And segmentation is just kind of a swishing back and forth in the intestinal tract. The whole purpose is to make a large bolus into little smaller ones. Now, why do we want to do that? Think about the idea of surface area to volume. Right? There's that surface area, but if I break it into smaller little pieces, I get a lot more surface area. This will speed up digestion. And the best analogy I can give you guys is think of 2 large chunks of ice. 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot cube of ice. We're going to time how long it takes to melt, or maybe how many days it'll take to melt. Take an equivalent chunk of ice, 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet, and smash the hell out of it into small little chunks. Which one's going to melt faster? The little chunks, right? Why? Way more surface area, way more part of the ice exposed to heat. Right? It's just common sense. So our body uses common sense. If I want to really absorb that and digest it, it behooves me to make it into smaller little pieces so I can then add my enzymes and my acids and get those nutrients absorbed as fast as possible. And all that is due to your muscularis externa, controlled by the myenteric plexus. All right, let's now start. We're done with the generalities. Now we're off to specifics. All right, start from the mouth, the buccal cavity or the oral cavity. I know there's 2 palates in my mouth. There's the hard palate and the soft palate. The hard one you can feel with your tongue and your finger. right? Go back to where your uvula is. Whoops, hang on here. Go back to your uvula, right? That's your soft palate, where there's no bone. Palatine bone and maxilla form my hard palate, and then the soft tissue forms my soft palate. Well, if I'm chewing, if you guys have never really noticed, you might notice this. It's funny, it came up twice this week already. Captain Crunch cereal.
Hurts.
All right? Why does it hurt? It rips your mouth to shreds, right? Especially the top of your mouth.
Yeah.
All right? You feel the washboard? Take your finger and feel the ribs on the roof of your mouth, right? Those are there to help you push the food up against and kind of mush it. If this was nice and smooth, it wouldn't be nearly as beneficial as having a rib-like texture on top of your mouth. And if that is true, I'm going to wear the hell out of that skin. So I need to make it really, really tough. So the hard palate is covered or lined with keratinized stratified squamose. Because I want to really, really protect the bony tissue underneath of it. Now when you look at how chewing takes place, and I can use the hard palate to take my tongue and squish that food, I don't do that squishing back here. Plus this is flexible, right? If I push up against that, it's just going to fold back upwards. That ain't going to go anywhere. So this has to be stratified, but it doesn't have to be keratinized. It's not going to experience lots of friction and rubbing that would normally take place when you're using your tongue to chew your food with.
So so you're just saying the blue is the soft part mostly?
Yep.
Okay.
So now, if you think about why we need a hard palate and soft palate besides chewing our food, that comes down to this. It's a part of mechanical digestion, where you're mechanically breaking the food up. That's what digestion means, right? To break up into smaller pieces, like molecules. Well, we're going to simply use the mechanics of chewing to mechanically digest our food. And this is why Grandma tells you to chew your food 30 times before you swallow, right? Making the tiny little pieces so you get better nutrient extraction from that material. At the same time, we're also going to begin chemical digestion, use of enzymes to begin to break down the chemical components. And then we're going to have, since we have the mucosa of our mouth, we're going to have salivary glands that are going to empty into your mouth to help lubricate whatever it is, right? So it's easier to swallow. To see the benefit of needing this, which is going to lead us to these guys in a minute, try a bet with a friend of yours. You can't drink anything. But I want you to chew and swallow in less than a minute 6 saltine crackers.
Oh yeah.
Ain't gonna happen, right? Ever given your dog peanut butter?
That's the best thing ever.
Right? It's just stuck up there, right? Those saltine crackers are gonna soak up whatever moisture you've got, right? Even trying to be cranked up by the salivary glands. There's not enough to lubricate that mass, a paste. So it's gonna get stuck in your mouth, right? That's why we need salivary glands to lubricate the food. Now, we'll get to that in the next coming slide. This is more of a review for you because we already covered this when we did respiration. But I do know that my mouth is a common pathway for both food and air breathing behavior. So I need lots of tonsil tissue to protect that passage of material. Right? Remember, tonsils are for your immune system. So if I'm eating things, right, and that might be kind of questionable in germ content, I want to have a nice little army that might recognize those germs and begin creating the antibodies so I don't get too sick from it. You want to keep in mind you guys are spoiled. I mean, you really are. How many of you have a 5-second rule? All right. How many of you have a 20-second rule? How many of you have a 5-minute rule?
Depends on what it is.
Oh, how about a 2-hour rule?
No.
No, why not?
It's a little intense. It
A little
depends
intense?
like what it is. Because that's a lot more
How about a 3-day rule?
Now you're putting hyenas and dogs. Yeah.
It's like, cereal said now.
You used to have a 3-day rule, if not even more than that.
How long ago?
Let's go back 10,000 years ago. You're walking through the plains of Europe, and you come across a dead animal and you go, that doesn't smell too bad. Yeah, it's got some maggots in there, but yeah, that's more protein, right? You're gonna eat it. It's survival. You don't have grocery stores, right? You're not farming. You're not growing your own crops. When you found food, you took advantage of it, right? Rotten food, rotting food, doesn't matter. I mean, there's a certain cutoff point where you're gonna go, no, not even my dog would eat that, right? But in those days, I wanted lots of immune protection because I'm eating things that are 1, 2, 3 days old, all right? You were just doing what crows do today, right? Keeping the habitat nice and clean. So I want lots of immune tissue, right? Where I have food coming in. So you have your, right, your pharyngeal, your palatine, and your lingual tonsils to help just provide a good defense mechanism. All right. Let's look at salivary glands. And here's the easiest way to do it first. Just memorize the names of the glands first, right? You got a blue one, a green one, and a red one. All right? The blue ones are the parotids. And let's go to the picture and we'll come back to these guys. The parotids are, what's that muscle? The masseter, yeah. It's actually superficial to it. If you like Sour Patch candies or really sour candies, ever get that kind of a contraction feeling right here? Right? That's the set of salivary glands trying to contract to neutralize the acidity of the sourness. So those are known as your parotid salivary glands. There's a right and a left one. And you only have one duct. Then what's the name of the duct? Yeah, it says so right there, right? So I have a parotid salivary gland with a parotid duct. The only question is, where does that duct lead to? It's the upper jaw behind the second molar. You're not going to really see it, but that's where saliva will be able to enter the oral cavity from those. Because you can actually feel the gland right here, but the saliva is in your mouth. Those got to pass right through and get to that second molar on the inside of your mouth, not the outside. It's going to produce a really important enzyme called salivary amylase. So that's the beginning of chemical digestion. Do you remember what kind of substance amylase works on? Is it proteins?
Starch.
Starch. Helps to make them taste sweeter. Now, where am I going to find the sublingual salivary glands?
Under the tongue.
Yeah, exactly, right? Hello, the name tells you where to find them. You have right and lefts. But here is, you have multiple ducts. You don't have just one. Right? And I can see that in the picture. All right, there's my sublinguals, and like little manifolds to an engine, right? Lots of little ducts. And again, you won't see those holes running along the inside of your tongue, right? But they're going to be there. At the base of my tongue, I'm releasing lots of saliva. They produce a lot of lubrication material and some enzymes that we'll talk about a bit later. And then the most important one, the one that produces the vast majority of your saliva, about 75% of it, are the submandibulars, below the mandible, right? Now you gotta be careful. In my mind, below is like, meaning like right here, because that's below my mandible. You gotta think of it in terms of animals and zoologists. The position of the head. Sub is gonna be actually underneath. And you can find it by looking at George over here. All right? I look at this dude here. I've got a nice parotid right there. Tip the jaw under, right? That's below the mandible. So there's your submandibulars on both sides, and then you have a nice little sublingual running right along in through there. Now they produce most of your saliva. They only have one duct, just like your parotids do. But let's look at where they come out. So I can see the parotids and the sublinguals. That doesn't do you guys really good justice. This is only this is only here to show you where the submandibular ducts lead to. The anterior portion of the base of your tongue. So go home, look in the mirror, go, Now, the best way to see them, to have a lot of fun, go to YouTube. And then squirting saliva.
Oh, yeah.
There are folks who can squirt saliva by 2 feet. They can control these glands.
Squeaking.
Like a spitting cobra, right? I can probably reach you guys from here if I could actually do it, and I can't, so don't worry, okay? But it's kind of cool to watch, right? It also really reinforces the fact they come out of the base of your tongue right there. All right, teeth. 3 major parts: the crown, the neck, and the root. Got that? Okay. What is made of the crown? What do I find in the crown region? Well, the outer part is enamel. Those are the pearly whites. It's the hardest substance we have in the body. And when you get bacteria growing in it, what happens to the enamel?
Deteriorates.
Yeah, what do we call that? A carrier or a cavity, right? Then you get to go to the dentist. Right below it is what's called the dentin, which is similar composition to spongy bone tissue. But there are no living cells in the dentin. And there's no living cells in the enamel. Do we grow new enamel? No, well, actually that may no longer be true. There's a paper came out a year ago. There's a research team that has found a way to maybe reactivate the cells that made the enamel in the first place.
Yeah.
And if this is true, no more cavities. You simply just reactivate the cells and they regrow more enamel. I'm not sure if I want to be a dentist anymore, right? Because you're going to lose that part of your business, unless they're going to be the ones that do the injecting of the material perhaps. Right? So we know that's really hard. And the dentin is actually pretty hard itself, but there's no living cellular material in here. Then I go to the deepest layer, which is the pulp. And it has arteries and veins and nerve endings. That's where your toothache comes from. That's where your temperature sensitivity comes from. Right? Because now you've maybe worn away some of the enamel and some of the dentin, and now you have enough, or just a little bit of tissue left to protect the actual structure, but the temperature can now reach them and irritate the nerve endings. And that dentin and pulp are going to go all the way down the roots, all the way down into here. So the central portion of the root is hollow, and that's where those nerve endings and veins will pass through. So this actually then, if this is your mandible, helps to form the tooth socket, which you guys were learning as the alveolus. So you look at the lower jaw or an upper jaw, right? Those little bumps you saw, right, were the tooth socket. And that's this. If I just pull the tooth out, right, I'm going to have these little sockets that are made in there to hold the tooth in place. Do you remember what kind of a joint this is an example of? What kind of structural joint? I want first, what kind of structural joint? Not specific. What is the structural classification? So in other words, what kind of a joint is a Goldfuss joint? Is it cartilaginous? Is it synovial?
It's a fibrous.
It's fibrous. That's the structural classification. Now, is it movable or non-movable? Why is it non-movable? We never told you why it was non-movable. Here's 2 reasons why. That bone, like tissue, is not up against this bone. There's a space. So we fill the space with that. Look familiar? Cementum. It's biological glue. It'll help glue your tooth into the socket. That's pretty cool. And then to really make sure it's really strong and reinforced, I also have ligaments. And since this is a tooth, why don't we call the ligaments periodontal ligaments? And they're simply just going to run from the bone of your jaw to the root of the tooth. Just kind of back and forth. So these little blue and red lines represent those ligaments. So I've got cementum, and I've got ligaments. That tooth ain't going anywhere, unless maybe it's your baby teeth. And some of you might actually remember what those periodontal ligaments kind of feel like. How many of you like to wiggle that tooth and pull it out slowly? Remember that tearing sensation you felt? Right? That's you ripping those last bit of ligaments. Most of them are going to dissolve, right? But that last bit, that little ripping feeling, was you tearing the last remnants of those ligaments, trying to keep your tooth in for the next day or so. Now, with that, we can look at what kind of teeth you guys have in your mouth. Right? We're going to have incisors. Those are the ones in the front. then your vampire or canine teeth, otherwise known as your cuspids. Then you have your bicuspids, otherwise known as your premolars. Then we have our molars back in there. So those are the 4 different types of teeth in our mouth. Let's look at where they are. Here's the easy thing about this. Only learn what's in blue. What does that mean? What am I not going to learn?
It is not.
All the eruption dates I could care less about. All I want you to know is that when you have baby teeth, how many teeth do you have? 20. And there are 5 per quadrant. So how many quadrants do I have? 2 ways to know that. Quad means 4, and 5 into 20 happens 4 times. All right? Here's how you divide it. There's the roof of your mouth. Those are little rib-like structures. I go right up the middle, and then I go, well, there's one quadrant. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The other quadrant, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's great. And then 4 down here, right? Or 5, excuse me. 5 here and 5 there. 5 and 5 are 10. 10 and 10 are 20. It's all my baby teeth. Now, they are eventually all going to go away, and we don't care about the eruption dates. But when you're an adult, it's a little more crowded in there. And yes, your mouth is bigger, but it's also a lot more crowded. And I've got 8 teeth per quadrant, for a total of 32 teeth. Because last I checked, 8 times 4 was 32. Again, don't worry about the eruption dates, just learn what's in blue. And then this little thing is called a dental formula. It allows you to recognize what species of animal you're dealing with. If you're a zoologist, you memorize all kinds of dental formulas. Anybody here have a class in botany? I know, boring. There's also a floral formula. It's a numerical pattern of petals to sepals to anthers and stamens. And if you know the pattern of the numbers, you know what species of a plant it is. Well, this simply means incisors, right? Canines, premolars, and molars. But we don't need to, that's just fun little trivia for you guys. All right, last little bit, last slide. I should have to say a single thing about this because it's a complete review for the respiratory system. All right, we're looking at our pharynx divided into 3 regions, the naso, the oral, and the laryngeal pharynx. And I know the borders of them, right? From the uvula, the tip of my soft palate up is the nasopharynx. And then the the oral pharynx is from the base of the uvula down to about my hyoid bone. It's in direct line with the mouth for orating. And then below that, really the line should be right about here. My blue line is not cooperating. But that's my last little vestige of this, known as the laryngeal pharynx. And then notice for this that the esophagus is posterior to the trachea. What cartilage is that? No, not what kind. I say what cartilage. What's the name of it? Oh, I guess we better work on that. Okay. That'll be in the next quiz after that.
The inferior one.
Okay. That's it. We're done. All right. Most of this stuff doesn't have any models for, except for maybe salivary glands. The remainings that we're going to accomplish on Monday has got lots of need to look at models. All right. So we're going to finish these notes on Monday. This is all intellectual. The first 25, the second 25 are lots of models and intellectual basis. Nothing really here to have to work on for that. So, I will see you guys on Saturday, those of you that come on Saturdays. If not, I will see you guys on Monday. Don't forget about the quiz we have on Monday.